This video is sponsored by the Ides of March. More about them later on. What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and it's time for another episode of the best armies in Warhammer 40k. This is the weekly video series where we go through undefeated results from the past week of competitive Warhammer 40k and talk about what's currently winning. This is going to be a bit of a shorter episode this week because we are heading into holiday season, so the number of GT plus events going on around the world is a little bit depressed. It'll probably be a little light for this and next week, but I'm sure we will still have some interesting results to talk about. And as we move into the Metagame Breakdown, we can see that we do have a new winner of the game right now, that being Chaos Daemons, who were able to take down 2 events this week, those being the Portal Winter GT as well as Battle Sector Scun. Both of those were with Scintillating Legion. This detachment saw some huge, massive improvements in datasheet updates from the past data slate update that improved the damage output of the Lord of Change, the Greater Demon of Tzeentch, by about 50 to 100%, and for a Tzeentch-focused attachment, that does make sense. That would catapult it into the realms of playability. It'll be interesting to see if other varieties of Chaos Demons running Lords of Change end up being more viable, but in this case, we do have 2 Scintillating Legion undefeated, and we're going to be talking about both of those this week. As I mentioned, we do have a lower number of events this week, so we're going to be going deeper into the results. Moving on from there, we did also see a 5-0 result at Wizards Winter GT from Drukhari. World Eaters also took down the Black Crow Gaming Battle of the Ragnar GT. We also saw undefeated, although tied results, X0-1, from both Necrons. That was the second place placement at Battle Sector Scun, which was interestingly a Hypercrypt Legion, whereas typically we've been seeing things like Starshatter Arsenal be strong from that faction, and in some cases things like Awakened Dynasty. Hypercrypt Legion has been off the competitive scene for a while, but it seems like it's coming back. We also saw a X0-1 result to win the Gash Hammer End of Year GT Shark Tank. That was Deathwatch over there from Australia. And so with that, let's dive into the lists themselves. This video is sponsored by the Ides of March, which in addition to being a date is also the date for a Warhammer 40k and AOS GT. Ides of March is a multi-game event held every year in Central March at the gorgeous Samoset Resort in Rockport, Maine. This event venue features stunning views in an absolutely incredible locale, and you can enjoy those views while playing Warhammer 40k. The event will feature not only a 100-player Warhammer 40k major, but also a similar-sized event for Age of Sigmar, as well as events for Blood Bowl and Star Wars Shatterpoint. Not to mention, it's also featuring a painting competition for those who are more hobby inclined. I'll be there live streaming the event, so I'll see you there as well, as long as you head down to the links in the video description or hit the QR code on screen to get your tickets to the Ides of March today. And I'll see you there March 13th through 15th, 2026. So starting off with our metagame frontrunners, that being Scintillating Legion, we're going to move on over to the Battle Sector Scun. While this wasn't the largest event of the weekend, this event did run 6 rounds, and so we got to a winner going 6-0 undefeated, that being Jordan McGregor with Scintillating Legion. Now, this is going to be juxtaposed to the other Scintillating Legion list we're going to be talking about today, which actually gives us a little bit of an interesting look at what the new metagame of Chaos Demons may be moving on into the future of the season, because this one is incredibly focused on monsters and dealing damage with characters. In fact, the name of the list in Best Coast Pairings was I Hope I Don't Draw Action Secondaries, because this is an incredibly Greater Demon-focused list. This includes Be'lakor, the Great Man himself, mostly to protect from the Greater Demons from early game shooting, but then also to give them reroll ones to hit. The Lords of Change have the effect that they can grant a sustained hit D3 effect, which makes any reroll on their datasheet incredibly strong. You can basically generate an additional 2 to 3 hits out of each of those rerolls, depending on whether or not you roll a critical. We then have a Demon Prince with wings. This guy has a once per game effect to give him 3 bonus attacks, and the Neverblade enhancement increases his strength characteristic by 1, and the Neverblade enhancement increases his strength characteristic by 2, bringing him up to a very respectable strength 10, as well as giving him +1 attack and AP. That brings him up to a baseline 7 attacks at strength 10, AP 3 damage, with a once per game effect to go up to 10 attacks. He also has sustained hits on that weapon. You can choose when he is selected to fight, which Be'lakor can then also grant rerolls to, or you can use flux tokens to reroll as well. In addition, you could use the Pyrogenesis stratagem on any Tzeentch demon to give +2 strength or +3 strength and +1 AP if you also pay a flux token, the detachment's resource mechanic. This allows this guy to go up to potentially AP 4, strength 13 with up to 10 attacks, which allows him to, once per game, if you do have all the resources to dump into him, absolutely dumpster something. So that gives you, in addition to Be'lakor, 2 very solid anti-tank melee profiles that you can use to back up your Lords of Change. The Lords of Change can then provide you an incredibly strong shooting battery. They have a 4+ invulnerable save, they have a boatload of wounds, so while their toughness value isn't very high, and low impact, high volume of attacks, like many lethal hit attacks, for example, will actually kill them very quickly, that's not a lot of the profiles that people are building into right now, especially if we're trying to deal with 2+ armor save Space Marine armies that are rocking multiple units of things like a Victrix Honor Guard or Deathwing Knights that are able to tank those low volume attacks. These demons are able to eat any high AP shooting that's trying to go into you, entirely ignore that AP, save most of it, and then hit back even harder. If you are able to get up and engage them, not only does the list have Kairos Fateweaver to not only fuel its own stratagems on its own turn, so it can do things like Pyrogenesis, you can use Delirium Unmade to pull units out of engagement range and place them into Deep Strike. He's able to fuel those stratagems with his own CP generation, but then also he can tax your stratagems once he gets up close, so he prevents the army from being quite as neutered by defensive technology like Smokescreen or Armor of Contempt, which can actually really impact the Lords of Change. The Lord of Change has a baseline AP1 or AP2 range weapon profile, so any AP manipulation on their weapon can be problematic for the Lord of Change that is not using Pyrogenesis to increase his own AP. They do have the opportunity to grant Ignore Cover to their own weapon reactively in response to your defensive stratagems, because for whatever reason, their ability to buff their Bolt of Change is untimed. It actually doesn't work when they're selected to shoot. It just works before they roll their attack roll, which is strange, which means you can use it in response to enemy defensive strats. So if your opponent goes to ground, for example, you can then declare that you're going to become Ignore Cover before you go to attack. However, that does dramatically reduce their potential damage because you don't get those sustained hits anyway. So this army is going to deal a lot of damage, but it does need all of those command point manipulation effects and ability to fight through armor penetration characteristic manipulation in order to consistently deal that damage, because if the Lords of Change spike low and don't do very much, they are basically half of the army, so that becomes very difficult to close out from there. In addition to that, we just have some very solid demon utility units, 2 units of flamers for 65-point deep striking infantry. They're relatively fast moving on the table. They're kind of hard to kill. They're actually 9 wounds for 65 points with a 4+ invuln save, which means you have to actually put in some pretty serious work to remove them, which can make them nice. A lot of units that will often come in and clear out a normal utility unit, something like Space Marine Scouts, for example, may struggle with the flamers because simply they just have that 4+ invuln save. Same thing goes for Screamers, who can also hit hard in melee and move farther on the battlefield. Honestly, this is a list after my very own heart. I absolutely love these styles of list. It can be difficult to shoot at early because of Be'lakor, and then once you've moved up closer to range, it's going to be able to come back and hit you super hard. Interestingly, one of the Lords of Change here is running Improbable Shield to give Feel No Pain against mortal wounds. We do have a Lord of Change with Infernal Puppeteer, which allows him to essentially gain indirect fire to fire through the eyes of other Tzeentch demons within 9 inches of him. There is a little bit of controversy with this enhancement that I guess we can cover here. There's an open question right now about exactly how this works. Because a unit without any eligible targets is unable to be selected to shoot, that's in the rules commentary, which was put in there after the rules were originally printed in order to prevent things like Abaddon from activating Dark Pacts with no eligible targets, so he could fire his bolt gun in the air and you Dark Pact in order to gain command points. It was changed so that if you have no eligible targets, so that ideally, meaning no enemies within range and line of sight of your weapons without any additional effects preventing you from targeting them. Although, unfortunately, in the rules commentary, that's actually never stated that that's what the rule means. Then you aren't selected to shoot, and Infernal Puppeteer allows you to gain the line of sight of another model at the time you are selected to shoot. So currently, rules as written, you are actually unable to Infernal Puppeteer if the Lord of Change is hiding and has nothing in range and line of sight. What it would allow you to do is use something else as soon as you're selected, and if you do have an eligible target, to then target something different that is potentially farther away or behind its own line of sight blockers. But, for example, you have a Screamer that can see it, and you're able to fire through the Screamer. So it's a little weird. The open question is what the intention of the enhancement is. It was assumed to work so that you could fire even if the Lord of Change did not have line of sight initially to its target. However, that's open for debate right now, and a lot of TOs, I think, are ruling that it does not allow you to fire if you have no targets to begin with. I don't know if these events used that ruling, but it does dramatically change the power level of this particular enhancement. Now, with that, we're going to continue to discuss Scintillating Legion for a moment and talk about a much more scoring-oriented version. We're going to move over to the Portal Winter GT, which was won by Adam Weinstein, who was also playing Scintillating Legion. Now we see a lot of really similar inclusions here. We have Be'lakor to protect the Lords of Change and then to give them rerolls. We have a Lord of Change with Infernal Puppeteer, as well as one with Inescapable Eye. Now the Inescapable Eye is an extremely common piece of technology inside Scintillating Legion, and I'm surprised that we actually don't have it on the other list, because it grants you additional Flux tokens, which you can use for rerolls if your opponent is holding any Flux tokens at the time. So the way the Flux token mechanic works is that the Demon player starts with a pool of Flux tokens, usually 3, then will generate 1 each command phase if the opponent is holding on to 1 or more. As you spend Flux tokens, which you can do either to empower your stratagems or to reroll your dice, you hand them to the opponent, and they can also spend to reroll their dice, in which case they hand them back to the Demon player. As long as your opponent does not spend all of their Flux tokens, you generate new Flux tokens to your pool, and Inescapable Eye doubles the number that you generate, as long as the Lord of Change is there. That allows you, if your opponent is holding on to at least 1, to use both Pyrogenesis and Delirium Unmade at their full power every single battle round, which is incredibly strong. That allows you to pull 2 Tzeentch Demons out of melee and put them into reserve, as well as empower one of the Lords of Change up to Strength 13 AP3 with Pyrogenesis, or use it in melee if you want to as well. Without that, the detachment, without that enhancement, or without the ability to use Flux tokens in that way, the detachment does actually end up sort of feeling a little bit low on power. However, you do obviously have the opportunity to hand them to your opponent at the end of their fight phase to ensure you generate new ones, and keep the ones that you began the game with in order to generate some as well. So Inescapable Eye you can play around. It's not necessarily required, but it does make the economy of Flux tokens much, much easier. Now, with that, we also have a ton of utility in this list. First off, we have a Nurgling Swarm for some early game screening. We do have Flamers, 2 units of 3, like we saw in the previous list. However, this list is also running a big unit of 6. The unit of 6 is extremely difficult to kill, 18 wounds for only 130 points with that 4+ invulnerable save, and you also get the opportunity to use Pyrogenesis on these guys if you don't have a good target for the Lords of Change. That brings them up to a potential Strength 8 AP2 with 6d6 auto-hitting attacks, which makes them actually pretty good at clearing out your opponent's utility by themselves. The other thing you can do is, if we do have the opportunity to use Infernal Puppeteer, the larger units allow you to string them farther out. The way that Infernal Puppeteer works is that it allows the Lord of Change to fire through another Tzeentch Demon as long as any model in that unit has line of sight to the target. The unit that you are firing through needs to be within 9 inches of the Lord of Change, but the model you are using for line of sight and range does not. So, for example, the Flamers could string all the way out with the distal end of the formation up to potentially like 12 inches away from the other end of the formation, because you have 6 models plus coherency between them. Then the Lord of Change can be 9 inches away from the back end, the proximal end of that line. So he ends up being somewhere around 20 inches away from the front Flamer in the unit, who he can then draw line of sight and range through, which is incredibly strong. We then also have a Fleshhound unit. They have a free up-down you don't have to spend any command points on, so they're incredibly strong as a utility squad. And then we have a ton of Screamers, 2 units of 6 and a unit of 3. Again, we can do exactly the same thing as with the Screamers as we do with the Flamers. The other benefit is that they do actually actually provide some pretty serious melee output. We can also use Pyrogenesis on those guys to bring them up to AP 3, Strength 9 in melee, which actually makes them pretty good in addition to their anti-monster, anti-vehicle. Not quite as good as that Neverblade Demon Prince, but they're definitely going to leave a mark on something if they do impact it at full power. So absolutely fascinating to see the Lord of Change alteration absolutely catapult Scintillating Legion into competitive play. This detachment's been kind of just around the fringes for a really long time, but the massive numbers of buffs that we've been seeing to it over the course of the year have finally catapulted it into really the top echelon of the metagame. What I'm really curious to see is whether or not other demonic detachments start to see some more play as well. I think there's very interesting play inside both Demonic Incursion and inside Shadow Legion that can combo with the new shooting battery that demons can field, which is these multiple Lords of Change, all with relatively decent AP, high damage shooting attacks, which is not something a demon's ever had access to previously. And being able to utilize those in new and novel ways is definitely going to redefine the faction. I think there's a lot of exploration with this faction as we move on through the remainder of the format. And whether or not this infernal puppeteer question gets clarified at some point could also dramatically change whether or not this detachment continues to see play. Now with that, let's move over to Drukhari, who ended up taking down the Wizards Winter GT. Cody Giroux, the Drukhari extraordinaire, won that one with Spectacle of Spite, the succubus and witch-focused detachment. Now, I absolutely love this list because, kind of similar to some of the demon lists we were talking about, this one is focusing basically just entirely on characters and character-led witch units, as well as some very high-impact elite infantry units. That includes, so we've Lady Malice, as well as Lilith Hesperax. There are no attachments inside the army for Lady Malice, so I think we're just simply using her as a agent of discord. She's going to be able to hop into a Venom alongside a utility unit of witches. We can run her out to then command point tax any enemies once we start to get stuck in with the real high impact units in the army. So things like these big Hellion squads or these succubus attached witch units are going to be able to run alongside her and prevent enemies from being able to use things like Overwatch, reactive moves, Armor of Contempt, all of this stuff. Incredibly strong in an army that's going to play as aggressively and with such a skirmish game plan as Spectacle of Spite. We have Lilith Hesperax for her ability to clear infantry, and as well as 3 succubi. I think the number of succubi inside these Spectacle of Spites have definitely been interesting to experiment with. This one is basically going all in with 3 succubi, all of them including enhancements. So that includes one with the Chrono Shard for a once per game fight first. The big thing here as well is that we can use a challenge met at the end of the opponent's movement phase to charge into them. We don't get a charge bonus when witch units charge during the movement phase, but it can mess with your opponent's ability to move. Obviously, they cannot then shoot into you. They cannot shoot unless they themselves are a vehicle or a monster. However, without the charge bonus, they would be able to fight you first or charge with a second unit and then fight you. But with Chrono Shard, you can just swing first and try to get into a unit, swing before it attacks you, clear it, and then be unengaged when it comes back to your turn and continue to push into your opponent. So incredibly strong enhancement in this particular detachment. We have one with Morgana's Curse that is +1 AP and damage, which actually brings the Succubus up to a pretty reasonable damage output, especially against infantry. A lot of times they're going to be relying very heavily on their anti-infantry profile, but that brings them up to AP 3/2 damage, which gives the Succubus itself, especially alongside the detachment ability, which can do things like improve your strength characteristic, which can do things like improve your attack or strength characteristic, makes them very good at clearing things like medium infantry. And then last, we have one with Periapt of Torments, which just prevents enemies from firing Overwatch on you. Very good, especially for a toughest 3 low save characteristic unit. From there, we have 4 units of witches to attach in with the succubi. We have a single Venom, so one of those units is going to be split into 2 5s, and then 2 Raiders to carry 2 more of them around. So we're going to have 2 units of 5, 1 unit on board, and 1 unit inside the Venom. 2 of them are going to be attached to the Raiders. That's most likely, if I had to guess, the Chrono Shard, as well as the Periapt of Torments models to allow them to engage more easily. The large witch units also give you some really weird interactions alongside challenge met, because once you start to get these big charges off on large units, you can do things like, during your opponent's movement phase, start to try to engage or activate slingshots to get your succubi into utility units that your opponent might not be expecting. Let's say, for example, that they move all of their models, they try to block off your challenge met and then move in a second model in order to come in and perform an action or to complete a secondary like area denial, establish locus, something like that. You declare your challenge met, you charge into a unit that moved up to your 10 model witch squad. You can then use your witches to move into base contact with the unit that is closest to you to make the charge more easy, and then combat slingshot your succubus off of that by moving it closer in a parabolic motion towards the charge target to then allow it to pile into the unit trying to perform an action and kill them. That allows you to gain additional value, not only with messing with your opponent's board control, but also being able to deny them scoring as well. So getting more control over your combat phase movements is not only good for these high OC infantry units, but also good simply because you're going to be able to do it in your opponent's turn on top of that, and you have powerful characters that you want to be slingshotting in. Pretty wild. We have a Chronos there in order to empower some of these units and gain additional pain tokens back. We have a bunch of Hellions, 2 units of 5, as well as a unit of 10 to act as our hammer blow. We're going to empower those guys for +1 strength and attacks and use their lance attacks to clear through enemies. 2 units of Mandrakes for utility, alongside a single Reaver squad and 3 units of Scourges with heavy weapons. In this case, 2 of them are rocking Dark Lances, so that's 4 Dark Lances in each of those 2 units, and then 1 unit is going to be running Haywire Blasters to give them more output against vehicles specifically. Downside being, of course, that a lot of times you will run into a purely monster composition, and suddenly those Haywire Blasters not very useful, so we have to rely on the Dark Lances entirely, which is why we're not taking all of 1 weapon profile. Now, moving on from there, we're going to continue to talk about some melee pressure armies alongside the Spectacle of Spite, because we're going to move over to the Black Crow Gaming's Battle of the Ragnar GT. This one was won by Harley Scully, running World Eaters in a Berzerker warband. Now, in this case, we were running a kind of a Berzerker-focused variety of the build. And what's interesting has been, despite the fact that they did ostensibly get kind of nerfed, how well we've been seeing World Eaters actually do. Part of it is that some of the meta opponents, things like Ultramarines and stuff, have been bringing more and more of these like aggressive heavy infantry builds, which actually World Eaters tend to prey on pretty well. And World Eaters were doing okay towards the end of the previous season, so they definitely, I think, were on the cusp of being a faction that could be problematic if they hadn't been nerfed in the last data slate. But it is interesting to see them, despite the fact that they weren't doing, they weren't at the top cutting edge of the metagame, they still got nerfed and they're still continuing to do pretty well. Now, in this case, we're running a Demon Prince of Khorne with the Helm of Brazen Ire to reduce incoming damage. We have Karn the Betrayer plus a Juggernaut Lord and a single Slaughterbound. No enhancements on any of those except for Battle Lust of the Juggernaut Lord to give him reroll to charge. Now, that Juggernaut Lord is almost certainly going to be jumping into the unit of 20 Khorne Berserkers. That gives them the ability, gives them a movement characteristic of 10, so they're able to go faster, and then the Lord of Juggernaut is able to go through walls. So this unit, especially alongside Apoplectic Frenzy to give these guys advance and charge, offer an incredibly fast onboard threat. We also then have 10 additional Khorne Berserkers for Karn the Betrayer to hop into in order to be delivered by a Chaos Rhino. From there, we have a ton of utility, a Goremonger unit for some early game infiltration, a Jackal squad for backline objective holding, in addition to 3 units of Chaos Spawn in order to act as just objective scorers. So on top of having already some pretty hefty output from our characters, right? We have a Demon Prince that's going to be able to hang out alongside these Khorne Berserkers, get Lone Operative from them, and then walk up alongside them to discount their offensive stratagems. But then we also have 30 total Khorne Berserkers plus character support, then 5 utility units in order to score secondaries as the game goes on. From there, we are able to close out the game with 3 units of 8-bound, 1 unit of standard 8-bound, as well as 2 units of Exalted 8-bound, one of them where the Slaughterbound's going to go into as well. So nice to see a little bit less of focus on 8-bounds now that they have been slightly nerfed, especially alongside the increased cost of the Slaughterbound in the last data slate update. So we are moving more towards the old school style of Khorne Berserker focused lists that we actually saw kind of take prevalence in World Eaters a couple months ago. Definitely still a very viable way to play the faction, however. Now, from here on out, we're going to start to talk about some X0-1 results. So that's results with a draw on their record. The first one's going to be from Gashhammer End of the Year GT-The Shark Tank. This one was won by Shalyn Kelly Irvin, who is playing Deathwatch. This is a Black Spear Task Force, so the standard kind of index detachment for the faction. This includes a Gravis Armored Captain with Tome of the Ectoclades. The big benefit here is that this guy is able to use a discounted cost stratagem on himself, we can use that to use site-to-site teleportation to discount the cost of that stratagem, targeting both him and a second kill team unit, assuming that he is attached into an Indomitor kill team, which he almost certainly is going to be. That lets you pick up 2 kill teams for 0 command points and then redeploy them using Deep Strike. So having any number of captains on the battlefield for this detachment is almost vital because of how command point centric it tends to be. And in some cases, based on your seat, first versus second, you can actually get a lot of use out of this. For example, if you're going first, you can pick him up at the end of your opponent's turn at the bottom of the round for free. So you can put he and 2 more units into strategic reserve, drop them back in. Because the battle round has reset, he has a new use of Rites of War available. So he's now able to use Kraken or Dragonfire rounds or whatever you need to on the subsequent turn to discount cost of the special issue ammunition stratagems that the detachment gets for its kill team units. So just incredible amounts of utility coming from captains of this detachment. Speaking of which, we also have a Watchmaster with Beacon Angelus that gives him a free rapid ingress once per turn. What's interesting here is that we're actually running a Judiciar as well. Oftentimes we'll see the Beacon Angelus on the Judiciar in order to give his unit Deep Strike. That is important because we're then able to set up rapid ingress plus heroic intervention combos, where if your opponent comes in to charge the strategic reserving or the deep striking Indomitor kill teams, you can rapid ingress behind them and then heroically intervene into the charging unit. That is going to allow you to fight first into the charger and prevent them from dealing enough damage to clear out your Indomitor kill team. And then hopefully the Gravis Captain can actually finish off whatever has originally come in. We're not seeing that in this case. Instead, the Judiciar is going to be dealing that additional damage with Thief of Secrets and get even stronger if he kills anyone, because he does grant his unit fight first. The opportunity to activate multiple times per game with the unit is much more reasonable than it is with a lot of other melee units. Sometimes you do see these effects that empower once you kill enemies that end up only being one-use abilities anyway, but because the Judiciar is going to fight first every single fight phase, he's probably going to be able to win protracted combats, so the Thief of Secrets actually pumping him to damage 4 is very relevant. We have a combi weapon Lieutenant, and then obviously Beacon Angelus on a Watchmaster to give him that free rapid ingress. We then have an Assault Intercessor squad plus a Deathwatch veteran unit. I imagine the Assault Intercessor squad is where the Judiciar is going. Deathwatch veterans are going to be attached to the Watchmaster in order to give them advanced shoot and charge. We have an Intercessor squad to hold down the backline, 1 unit of Jump Pack Assault Intercessors for utility, as well as an Incursor squad. We do have a Ministorum Priest for some additional utility in there as well. He's just a 40-point character. He's the Warlord in case it matters, so you can just hide him if your opponent has any benefits for killing the Warlord. But realistically, he's just a 4+ invulnerable save guy with a flamethrower who can hide in the back or come in out of reserve and do some secondaries once per game for cheaper than any Space Marine unit. We then have a bunch of Deathwatch Terminators, so 2 units of 5 Deathwatch Terminators. These guys combo the effect of having a skirmishing unit, so they're able to use site-to-site teleport or just simply deep strike naturally in order to get lines of sight to enemies. They're able to bring 2 Storm Shield equipped Terminators alongside 3 Cyclone missile launchers in only a 5-model squad. So they're bringing 6 crack missile shots with 2 4-wound ablative armor models, essentially. So their shooting's relatively strong for their points value, and the resilience is exceptional. It's difficult to kill them down through the Cyclone missile launchers with incidental shooting. You really have to overcommit to kill them. And so oftentimes what happens with Deathwatch is that the Terminator squads will play early. They'll drop in, you'll oath some units, they'll kill some utility, they'll maybe mess up some transports. Your opponent is forced to answer them, otherwise they're going to start taking your objectives and charging you. And in doing so, because they have to overcommit to kill these 2+ save, 4+ invulnerable save units with, what do they have, 17 wounds, they have to dedicate that strong anti-tank or anti-heavy infantry. That lets you counterpunch with the Indomitor kill teams and actually clear out those units and clear out the stuff that could kill the Indomitor kill teams to allow them to just like roll forward. From there, we have a Stormspeeder Thunderstrike who's going to shore up the Indomitor kill team's ability to deal with heavy armor. They do cap out at strength 11 with the Melta rifles in the unit, and while they can get bonuses from special issue ammunition, and some of them are going to be rocking lethal hit bolters, you really do want that +1 to wound from the Thunderstrike because Deathwatch don't get the +1 to wound from shooting their at the moment target. So him being able to buff you against monsters and vehicles is enormous in this particular army. But then we also have the 2 Indomitor kill teams. Each of those is going to be equipped with 3 Eradicators with Melta weapons, 2 Melta rifles, and a multi-Melta. We then also have 3 Boltstorm Gauntlet equipped Aggressors alongside add 2 heavy bolters and 2 heavy bolt rifles. One of those obviously is then also going to get some additional damage output, melee damage output from the attached Gravis Captain as well. So some interesting non-standard inclusions here from many of the varieties of Deathwatch that we would typically see, but largely very similar to other versions that we've seen in the past. Now, last and certainly not least, we're going to talk about Battle Sector Skana again, this one being the second place finisher who did go undefeated with a draw in the final record. 5-0-1, no losses on the record, just 5 wins and a draw. Tom Kemp went second at the event using Hypercrypt Legion. Now, this is fascinating because we haven't seen Hypercrypt Legion at the top of the meta for a really long time. Like I said at the start of the video, it's largely been Star Shatter Arsenal for Necrons over the last couple of months. However, Hypercrypt Legion's still there. We have been seeing lots of detachments that use a similar level of repositional effects and mobility to Hypercrypt Legion, and the ability to, which is always going to be strong. There's never a situation where you have an army that can constantly up, down, and deep strike, and there's never a situation where you're going to take an army that can constantly up, down, and deep strike and things like that and say that it's bad. Now, in this case, we are running kind of a scoring-heavy build, although it does feature some pretty interesting inclusions. This includes both a Monolith and a Night Scythe, which is sick. First of all, we have a Chronomancer, a Hexmark Destroyer with Dimensional Overseer. He himself he has Deep Strike, so when he goes into Strategic Reserve with Hyperphasing, he can then come in out of Deep Strike, which is helpful, but he also increases your Hyperphasing capacity by 1, so he allows you to pick up 4 units into reserve rather than just 3. That's going to be helpful for this army that's going to be very repositional focused. We then have Imhotep the Stormlord to generate command points in order to allow us to fuel our stratagems. We have a Plasmancer with Origin Tyrants that gives you reroll hits if you arrive from reserve. So the Plasmancer there is going to be able to trigger his enhanced critical effects. He gives a 5+ critical effect to the unit. You can then reroll into getting those 5+ criticals, which is awesome. We have the Silent King, the Great Man himself, who can, of course, go down and redeploy himself. He can use Cosmic Precision to hop in next to people to get lines of sight with his Triarchomeniers, or just act as a bulwark for the army. Lots of reasons to play him. We have then a bunch of battle line units. This includes an Immortal Squad with Tesla Carbines. That's where the Plasmancer to go into. So those guys get their 5+ criticals. They also get sustained hits too, and wound rerolls targeting enemies on objectives. And then you can reroll the hit roll to try to get more sustained hits from the Plasmancer. So for only 230 points, you're firing 20 times sustained hits to full hit and wound rerolls. It makes them actually very good at dropping in with Cosmic Precision or off a table edge and clipping enemies off of objectives in a very consistent way. We then have another unit of 5 Immortals. This might just be a bunker for Imhotep the Stormlord. And last but certainly not least, a unit of 10 Necron Warriors. Now, I have to imagine this is where the Chronomancer comes in. The ability to use Cosmic Precision to pick this unit up and drop them 6 inches away from enemies, fire their guns, and then use the Chronomancer's attachment ability to move after shooting, to then put 21 objective control characteristic almost anywhere on the battlefield, almost unscreenably. It's almost impossible to stop this unit from getting in to where it needs to be. Now, all that being said, we do have these 2 very important infantry units, 10 Warriors and 10 Immortals, one of which is good at scoring objectives, one of which is extremely good at clearing objectives, and we're going to be buffing those or utilizing our transports, our weird Necron transports, in order to steal objectives with them. So this is using the Monolith. The Monolith can either use Dimensional Corridor if it's on the battlefield to allow you to redeploy out of it, then charge using Dimensional Corridor, then charge if we need to. The other thing is we can use the Eternity Gate from the Monolith to grab the Necron Warriors or the Immortals, in either case, depending on what we need. We can Cosmic Precision the Monolith using Deep Strike 6 inches away from enemies to ensure that we can place it somewhere relevant. Then we can pull units like the Necron Warriors out of reserve and place them directly next to the Monolith, wholly within 6 inches of it, outside of engagement range of enemies, can then shoot and Chronomancer move the Warriors. So the Monolith can also act as a delivery system for this unit that can now basically steal objectives from anywhere. It's almost literally unscreenable at that point. As long as you can get the Monolith there first, the unit coming out of the Monolith is entirely unstoppable. You can also do something similar from the Night Scythe, which is an aircraft unit, so it's going to come in off of the board edge, or use Cosmic Precision to arrive 6 inches away from enemies, Once you arrive a transport out of reserve, you can immediately disembark its occupants. So we can basically do exactly the same thing with the Night Scythe as well. So we can hop in the Night Scythe, drop the Necron warriors down, shoot, and then move with them. Now we're putting a lot of emphasis on this Necron warrior unit, but we can keep them alive using hyperphasic recall for two command points. As long as your monolith is on the battlefield, if your opponent has destroyed one or more warriors or immortals from that unit, but not killed the unit, you can redeploy it back to the monolith. So we can basically use these units to range forward, interact with our opponent, steal their objectives, keep them from scoring, then utilize hyperphasic recall once they are attacked to redeploy them back to the monolith and use the monolith as kind of a base of operations. We do have a Canoptic Reanimator in the list as well, who you can redeploy your unit back to him, and he can double reanimate them to bring them back to fighting strength. And then later on in the game, you can use hyperphasic again to pull them into reserve, drop them out of the monolith, or use cosmic precision or whatever in order to redeploy them and utilize their capacity to clear objectives or take objectives one more time. So this is basically this hugely intricate combo between the monolith, the Night Scythe, and these infantry units to be able to recycle these units in and out of the fight, as long as your opponent doesn't either kill them in melee or wipe them out in one shot. And you can try to play cagey with them in order to make sure this doesn't happen. And you have the command points from Motaic Stormlord to fuel it. That unit can continuously recycle and try to continue to keep your opponent off balance and gain value sort of passively over the course of the game. From there, we also have just a ton of scouting units as well. What we don't want to have happen is enemies be able to screen out all the positions for the Night Scythe or the monolith to be able to drop. So we have 2 units of Tomb Blades who have not only shoot and scoot, but also the ability to scout. They can scout up early, clear out enemies off objectives, or score early maneuver secondaries. We also then have a Triarch Stalker who can scout as well for all of the same reasons, plus a Flayed One unit for infiltration. So we do have a lot of forward operators in order to play into this game plan. This list is absolutely crazy, and I love it. It's so cool. It's so intricate. And if you have not played against Hypercrypt Legion before, and you are not prepared to play against hyperphasic recall, it can be an absolute mind-bending experience. Because if your army doesn't have the capacity to kill, for example, 10 immortals in one shooting activation, which not a lot of armies do, to be fair, if you're not like playing Space Marines with 1,000,000 attacks, an Oath of Moment, and a bunch of layer buffs, a lot of times armies are trying to nickel and dime their opponents, and your opponent's holding up 2 CP. At any point, you could just have that unit take a little bit of damage and then reposition itself. So you have to be extremely careful about how you interact with it, and obviously the Necron player does have control over how that happens. They can determine the ranges at which they engage you at, because they're constantly going to be redeploying themselves into reserve, coming out of the monolith, coming off of table edges, cosmic precisioning back in. I love this list. It's so interesting. It has so many little cool synergies going on that it's absolutely crazy to look at, and I'm so glad that it was able to go undefeated so we could talk about it this week. But with that, those are all of the best armies of Warhammer 40k for this week. Thanks so much for watching all the way to the end of the video. Thanks as well to everybody who supports TacticalTortoise, including the Ides of March GT. Please check them out in the link in the video description to get your tickets today. I'll see you over there. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.